Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Let's talk about culture. The gender etiquette in Islam. Why are people dressed this way? If I put out my hand, will they shake my hand? Now, interaction between the sexes can be confusing to non-Muslims. So this recording, I will try to shed some light on the gender etiquette in Islam. But I'd like to point out one thing first. These interactions that I'm going to discuss, these rules, apply in general interactions when people are interacting with other people that they can, in some cases, marry. And so if a woman is dealing with her father, with her grandfather, with her uncle, if a guy is dealing with his aunt, with his mother, with his grandmother, and so on, these rules don't apply. They're only in interactions with people of the opposite sex whom theoretically they can be involved in a marriage relationship. And another point that I would like also to make clear is that the degree to which you will find people practicing this etiquette differs between individuals depending on their degree of practicing of the faith. Islam is not a religion that is my personal relationship with God, it's a way of life. So, to what degree this is shown or expressed in the way of life depends on how much a person is a practicing Muslim. Now, to do this, I would like to draw an analogy to help us understand the context of the gender etiquette in Islam. When I was in Canada and I had my children, the first thing that at the hospital, they brought in a little booklet and they had a place to put a few hairs from the baby and then a place to stamp the child's footprint and other places where you put any marking on the baby's body. This in Canada is a preventative measure just in case if my child gets abducted that I can recognize them again by these marks or their DNA. It doesn't mean that my child is going to be abducted. It's a preventative measure accepted in that country. Now, after my child became 3, nursery school, they were taught about strangers. They did skits and they described to the children how a stranger would look like. It would be a nice lady dressed all nice, and she would come to you while you're in the park, and she'll ask you to help her look for her dog. And then what should you do as a child? And so they acted out skits saying, stranger, stranger, how they should scream and ask for help. Now, this is also another preventative measure. It doesn't mean my child's going to be abducted. It just means that it's a preventative measure to prevent abduction. And before they hit 6 years old, they were taught in school about their private parts. What are their private parts? Who should and should not touch their private parts? This is also an acceptable preventative measure in Canada to prevent sexual abuse. Again, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So it's a preventative measure. Now I would like to use this analogy of these preventative measures that are acceptable in one culture and do the same when we talk about interaction between the sexes in another culture. What I'm going to say now, the rules of etiquette in interaction between the sexes are also preventative measures. It doesn't mean anything's going to happen, but the same case as what I've discussed in Canada, these situations or these rules are preventative measures in the Muslim culture or in the Arabian culture. Now, the next question is prevention from what? Now, to answer the question, prevention from what? If we look at Islamic law, and Islam is not a religion in terms of simply my personal relationship with God. Islam is a way of life, so it addresses all issues in one's life. And so if we look at all the rules that Islam addresses, we find that all the rulings that come out from the Quran are there to preserve and maintain five things for every individual and for the Muslim community: the preservation of life, the preservation of faith, irrespective if you're a Muslim or not, the preservation of genealogy and chastity, intellect, and wealth. So, for example, if there is a rule we don't use user in Islam, this is to preserve wealth. There's no stealing. This is also a rule to preserve wealth, and so on. Now, what I'm going to say now, the rules that I'm going to say now, are there for the preservation of genealogy and chastity for every individual in the community and for the community as a whole. So, I'm going to start with some of these rules. So the dress code is very important because that's the first thing you notice when interacting with anybody. Now, Muslims want to talk to the person in that body and not to the body. So this is also a preventative measure for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. Doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen, but it's a practice that is accepted and actually practiced by Muslims in Muslim communities. Now, the dress code for women, for Muslim women, is usually covering everything except face, hands, and feet. It has to be loose and it has to be non-see-through. For men, it's from shoulder to knees in most situations. Now, between the same sex, like women between women, they're not supposed to see each other naked. Also, the same with men. Men between women, between men, they're not supposed to see each other naked. This is also for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. Now, if you are going to live in a Muslim country, especially in more conservative countries such as the Gulf area, the more you are covered, the more you are respected, even if you're not a Muslim. Okay, and so if you're going to be an expat, natives of those countries expect you to dress modestly. This is one of the campaigns of people. For example, in Qatar, a Qatari lady had this on Twitter, so, asking the expats, now you are one of us. So basically, can you help us preserve or maintain genealogy and chastity for everybody in our community? And it shows that it's for ladies and for men. Because although you can see a country, there are so many changes and there are so many people from different cultures, still the natives of those countries are also trying to maintain their own culture, and they are asking people will help them and dress modestly. Physical touching. Now, of course, I'm not talking about hugging here. I'm just talking about shaking hands. Will somebody shake my hand if I put out my hand? Now, the safest bet is not to put out your hand unless the other person who is from the opposite sex and who's a Muslim puts out their hand first. Why? Because there are two rulings. One ruling in Islam is that you can, under certain circumstances, shake the hand of the opposite sex, and the other ruling is that you don't shake hands at all. So you will find some people following this, some people following the other rule. So the best bet is not to put out your hand unless the other person puts out their hand first. Now, this is also a preventative measure that is acceptable and practiced in the Muslim community. It doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen, but it is practiced for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. So a lot of times you will find that some people will not shake your hand, they will just put their hand on their upper parts of their body, on their chest, and considering that this is how they accepted your greeting, but they will not extend their hand. Now, what about body language? Body language, and there's no flirtation, of course, in Islam, and so it's very purposeful. And what I want to focus about is gazing. If you interact with Muslims, you will find that in a lot of times they will look down. They will start looking at you, talking to you, or if you're talking to them, and then they will look somewhere else. Now, this is not to show disrespect. This is actually to show respect, that I'm listening to the person in that body and I'm not staring at that body. So staring is not acceptable at the opposite sex. And so in this case, that person is actually applying the preventative measure in Islam. So I don't shake hands. I am dressed in a different way, and at the same time, it's a whole one package. The whole etiquette should complement each other, and so then I am not gazing and I'm not looking at the opposite sex. And this, of course, is practiced by women and men. Now, there's this situation. The media always has a thing going for this. Is that why do men sit at the front and they let women sit at the back? Men think they are superior and they treat their women as inferior in Muslim countries. This is not the situation. The situation is depending on the context. For example, if we're in a classroom, that, can we say that all the children who the teacher puts in the front row of the classroom are superior to the kids that she put in the back? She has a certain context that she follow in the classroom. And this is the same thing. If you want to judge it, you have to judge it according to the Islamic etiquette between the two sexes. Now, if we're saying you should not be gazing, okay, and you should be dressed in a certain way, you should not physically touch each other. So this comes as a one package. Then men, it's easier for men to sit at the front and the women to sit at the back. So this way you help people not to gaze. Okay, and sometimes what happens is that if you go into an auditorium, you will find women sitting at one area, and then automatically if a man comes, he will go sit in the other half of the auditorium. So they sit side by side. Nobody divided them. They just go and take that kind of seating. Why? Because it's more comfortable. And women are comfortable that way, and men are comfortable that way because it helps them to apply the other etiquette in Islam for the preservation of chastity and genealogy. Doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a single male and a single female cannot be alone in a place that is closed, nobody can see or hear them. So if you are visiting, if a lady or if a guy is visiting a teacher or a doctor or something, they might bring along somebody else, like their children or their friends or another family member and so on. Because, as I said, this is a preventative measure for the preservation of genealogy and chastity. Doesn't mean these people are bad or anything bad is going to happen. But this is an acceptable practice in the community, and people will be uncomfortable if, for example, they find themselves in a situation in a classroom setting and nobody's in the classroom and the door is closed and stuff. So if you are in a situation like that and you notice people are getting uncomfortable, this is probably the reason. So if you open the door, keep the door open, or meet in a place that there are more people in there. I hope this analogy was useful in helping you to understand the context and the basis for this gender etiquette in Islam. Now, as I said before, that the degree to which people practice this varies between individuals depending how much they are practicing Muslims. And so, also going back to the Twitter, you are one of us. To those who are going to be expats in Muslim countries, people there expect that you are now living with them, that you will help them to maintain genealogy and chastity in their community. Thank you.